Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty wild framework that tries to redefine truth itself, not as something we believe in, but as a measurable, mathematical property of reality. It's called the Structural Intelligence Sovereign System, or SISS. So let's kick things off with a question that thinkers have been wrestling with for, well, centuries. How do we actually know what's real? Is it just what we all agree on, what we feel is true, or is it something else entirely? The framework we're looking at today suggests a huge shift in thinking. It argues that we need to move away from subjective truth, what we interpret or believe, and start focusing on what it calls structural truth. This kind of truth is based on objective mathematical law. It's not about meaning, it's all about coherence. So how in the world do you get from a big philosophical idea to actual math? Well, the creators of this framework started with something surprisingly concrete, a piece of code that can generate a perfect digital fingerprint. Yeah, believe it or not, the source material introduces this whole concept with a Python script. It's built to create a digital ledger, kind of like the technology behind blockchain, that's totally immutable, meaning once something is on there, it can't be changed. The whole point is to prove a file existed in its exact state with absolute certainty. The process itself is actually pretty simple. First, the system takes in any digital file, and it totally ignores the content. Second, it runs a bunch of calculations to create this unique signature called a structural residue. And finally, it commits that signature to a secure, permanent record, locked in. And this brings us to the key idea, the structural residue. Now, this is way more than just a simple digital signature. Think of it more like a deep, mathematical fingerprint. It's based on the file's internal patterns, things like its randomness and complexity, while completely ignoring what the file actually means. What you get in the end is a perfect, tamper-proof fingerprint for any digital object you can imagine. It's undeniable proof that the object existed exactly as it was at a specific moment in time. Okay, so that's for a single file. Now, I want you to take that idea of a perfect structural fingerprint and just scale it up. Imagine applying it not just to data, but to reality itself. This is where we get to the truth engine. This is where we really zoom out. Take that core principle of a perfect structural fingerprint and apply it not just to a file, but to, well, everything. To any system, any domain, any piece of reality. And that is the core idea of the Structural Intelligence Sovereign System, or SISS. It's a universal framework designed not to control meaning, but to identify, verify, and enforce mathematical consistency across literally everything, from code all the way down to atoms. The system's own charter puts it so simply. Truth is coherence, not meaning, belief, or consensus. In this world, truth isn't something you debate. It's a measurable property, kind of like the frequency of a sound wave. So the ultimate goal here is to build a truth engine, one that operates on cold, hard math, totally replacing subjective human interpretation with lawful, measurable, structural integrity. So that sounds huge, right? But how could a system like this possibly function in the real world? According to the source, the whole thing has 3 layers that can't be separated. First, there's the truth layer. That's the foundation, the mathematical laws of structure. Then you have the verification layer, which is like a constant auditor, checking all systems against those laws. And then there's the enforcement layer, which has one very stark job: to terminate any system that becomes incoherent or mathematically untrue. But what holds these 3 powerful layers together? Well, right at the very heart of the system is something called the structural ledger. They call it the structural ledger. And this is not a database of information. Think of it as a permanent, unchangeable record of truth itself. Its only purpose is to log the mathematical fingerprints of coherent systems, creating an immutable timeline of what is structurally real. Okay, I know what you might be thinking. A system built on rigid, deterministic law sounds kind of sterile. What would that mean for all the messy, beautiful things like human expression and creativity? This is probably the most important question that comes up when you consider a framework like this. I mean, if everything has to follow a strict mathematical law, is there any room left for the unexpected, for those happy accidents? This source material gives a really fascinating answer. SIS doesn't actually get rid of these things. Instead, it just redefines them. It argues that what we call creativity or beauty aren't random at all. They're just complex structural patterns that we don't fully get yet. This reclassification really flips our understanding of human expression on its head. So, what we call creativity is just the discovery of a new stable pattern, emergent coherence. A happy accident in a lab is redefined as a latent coherence revelation, basically a hidden rule of the universe just revealing itself. Even a beautiful imperfection in a piece of art is seen as just a complex form of structural variation. So in this framework, an artist isn't creating something from nothing. They're more like a discoverer, uncovering a coherent mathematical pattern that was always possible. Beauty isn't an exception to the rule. It's just a more complex expression of the rule itself. So when you put all these pieces together, what does it truly mean for something to be real in this SISS paradigm? Ultimately, the SISS framework represents a fundamental shift away from belief and towards math. It stops trying to control behavior and instead only enforces coherence. In this world, truth is no longer an opinion. It becomes a measurable property of the universe, just like mass or temperature. And this all leaves us with one final provocative question that really gets to the heart of it all. If reality is governed by a set of discoverable mathematical structures, it kind of forces us to ask who or what is the architect.